Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're gonna have a look at a vintage pen made by Omas Studio. I bought this pen in new old stock condition about a year ago, and it came with the original box. And the reason I believe this is indeed the original box is that it has a proper marking for the model Studio and for the color narrow for black. Inside the paper box there is a plastic box in this nice wine red color, and inside the plastic box the glue has fallen apart a little bit, but there is a print that says Omas on it. And we also get two instruction manuals. One is for the Studio, for the fountain pen, and the other is for Mille, which is the matching ballpoint. So as you can see, the ballpoint really matches the fountain pen, even though the ballpoint has a different model name. The most interesting part about the ballpoint is that it has a Pelikan 37M refill, and this refill was made from 1960s up to early 1980s. So this might be the original over 50-year-old refill that came with the pen. And quite remarkably, this refill still writes. To me, everything seems to suggest that this is an over 50-year-old ballpoint refill that still works. Now back to the star of the show. This is the Omas Studio, very likely made in the 1960s. It's made out of black plastic with gold-plated furniture and a 14-karat gold nib. It's a pretty classic-looking fountain pen, apart from the flat ends. The clip has a pretty simple design and it works quite well, no complaints. Below the clip there is a gold-plated cap ring with no engravings, and on the pen itself there is an engraving Omas Studio and I believe the serial number. The pen has a piston filling system that is integrated remarkably well. There is just a very faint line in the plastic, but once you start turning it, it will reveal the threads for the piston filling system. The cap then unscrews in 1 1/4 rotations, which reveals a very nicely engraved 14-karat gold nib, and the feed, which I'm not sure if it's plastic or ebonite. The nib itself is not that big. As you can see, it's about the same length as the nib on the Lamy Safari. The section then is pretty narrow. It starts at about 8 mm, then tapers up to about 9 mm, and these threads do not bother me. When I got the pen, the piston filling mechanism was so stiff that I was afraid of damaging the pen, or at least the seal. Unfortunately, there is no obvious way of disassembling the piston filling mechanism, and it also wasn't possible to simply pull the nib and the feed out. However, I was able to pull the nib and the feed out by heating the entire section, and I think the nib and the feed use a little bit of shellac to keep them in place. Once I was able to remove the nib and the feed, I was able to grease the seal with a silicone grease, and after that the piston mechanism is now smooth enough, even though it's not as good as the one on vintage Pelikans. It's not a full-sized pen, only 12.7 centimeters long, and it's also fairly light at 12.7 grams. 11.7 centimeters when uncapped, about the same size as the Sailor 911S, and it's also very light for a piston-filled fountain pen, only 8.5 grams. It posts quite well, 14.9 centimeters. It's about the same size as the Sailor 911S. Now let's have a look at how it writes. So the pen is the Omas Studio, and I believe this is an extra fine nib, and the ink is diamine blue black. This nib definitely has a little bit of feedback, and it makes about 0.4 millimeter line, which puts it at European extra fine, even though there are no size markings on the nib. Skipping. It can skip a little bit when using no pressure. With a little bit of pressure, there are no flow issues. Hard starts. It's not completely perfect in down to up direction, but nothing that would bother me too much. Flex. I would say this is fairly soft, but I would not call it even a semi-flex nib. However, the softness that is there is quite pleasant, and you can add a little bit of flair to your writing. Reverse. It sort of works in reverse. The ink flow is not super reliable and the nib is extra fine, so you don't really get much from using it in reverse. Horizontal and vertical line variation, same as for most extra fine nibs, you don't really get any. And then wetness, it's a little bit dry, and I believe the nib should be tuned a little bit to make it a little bit wetter, and also to get rid of the hard starts and a little bit of skipping when writing with no pressure. Vintage Omas pens are normally famous for their materials and their nibs, and while this nib would be completely fine, especially after some tuning, I can't say it amazed me. Ergonomically, the pen is okay when posted, and it posts well. The section, however, could be a little bit wider, but that's a common complaint I have about vintage fountain pens. So overall, I'm quite happy with the pen. After some tuning, the nib will be pretty good, and I really like how well the piston filling mechanism is integrated into this pen. I also enjoy the classic shape with flat ends. What I don't like so much is that, to my knowledge, there is no way to properly service the piston filling mechanism. It's likely simply friction fit into the pen body, the same way Pelican does that. The shellac sealed nib and feet also make things a little bit more complicated than they need to be. The good news is that Omas also made a cartridge converter version of this pen called Studio C, which would make concerns for serviceability of the piston filling system disappear. So I'm not sure about recommending the piston filled version, but if you see a cartridge converter version somewhere at a good price and you don't mind the slightly smaller shape, then maybe consider it. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!